the bag, so they had to suppress it from him, from a teammate who works for the same newspaper.
Yeah, I've tried to figure out that aspect of him. I actually talked to when I wrote a thing about him on his 100th birthday, which was smaller to kiss up than this was today. But I talked to Tim McGuire about it. And I said, what was it? What caused him to be, the ultimate homer? And he thought it was acceptance. He was a 10-year-old kid from North Minneapolis with no money, selling newspapers on the street corner, and he wanted people to feel, to like to run into him. And now he didn't care about you and I and the negative geniuses. By the way, I was saying earlier today, he's the only guy who used geniuses as a negative. By the way, if you were called a genius, you might as well be called a, whatever profanity you can think of. But it's amazing how he was still. I call him an insecure egomaniac. It was kind of a contrast. I mean, he managed to remain insecure, even as he became a one-word celebrity in his entire state and lauded everywhere he went. But it's amazing how he just, what everybody's going to say about Sid 10 years ago is he had a column in the paper the day he died. That's
exactly right. By the way, McGuire's theory was the same as Chad's. He told us an hour ago about that, the 9-year-old, and about, he even talked about, his father drank a lot, was an alcoholic. He was not really very helpful. He was very close to his mom, as I'm sure you know, but he said the same thing. It was that 9-year-old kid doesn't finish high school the whole bit, and that a lot of that insecurity was bred there no matter what came after, and that became the thing he fed off of or couldn't rise above. That sort of made him the way he was. So McGuire might have been onto something.
Well, the psychology. I want to give you a little psychology about his insecurity. I write his book, right?
Yes.
1996. I write his book, and he's the only sports writer that needed somebody to write his book. But that's another story.
Yes.
But so, 3 days after it's published, and he comes over to me and says, because he's getting, people are reading the thing and they're saying, well, why didn't you write about this? Why didn't you write about this? He says, we got to write another book. Honest to God, it wasn't even the first of the year yet. It was like a month. I said, Sid, we got a contract. We can't write another book. I said, I'm going to write a book when you're no longer with us. I'm going to call it The Truth.
How did you get, refresh my memory about how you became Sid's official biographer?
He paid me to do it. He paid me to write it.
And did you have any trepidation? Because you got to spend a lot of time with him. And from afar, my thought on Sid was he was probably a gold mine of stories, but he didn't always know what he had. And so what was that process like? Was it fun? Was it painful? Okay. Was it aggravating?
Here's what happened. I started off trying to interview him. Well, and to try to interview him chronologically, and discovered that had no chance of working because he would be 40 years ahead and back and all over. So basically what I ended up doing then is coming up with 50 categories with sub-clauses and questions on them, and said, okay, get yourself a tape recorder, answer all these questions, and then I got a transcript of that, and then I went back and re-interviewed him. And dollars per hour, it was not one of my great things ever. But here's the highlight was when I'd give him 2 chapters at a time, and one day I give him the chapter that has his date of birth on there, and he scratches it out. It's scratched out when he gives it back to me. And I said, Sid, we got to have your date of birth in there. We're going to be charging people $25 or something. And he says, They don't need to know when I was born. Just say I was born. Okay. I said, okay, Sid. Some of us thought you were hatched, so that's okay, but unbelievable.
Let me ask you about, I can remember when I was still relatively new, I think it was when the Vikings made that playoff run in 87. And so, based on what I had already picked up, so I'd been there about a year at this point, and what I picked up was that, at least publicly, Sid and you and Sid and Souchere were at major odds, major odds. So I'm thinking there's almost like this open hatred. And then it turns out the day we're about to go to this is RFK Stadium. That's how far back it goes. And we all happen to have, it turns out, hotel rooms on the same floor in Washington. I don't know where we were staying. And I hear a commotion out in the hallway, and it's Sid and it's Souchere, and they're talking like they're good buddies and they're friendly, and I was all confused. I said, "Wait a minute! I thought Sushi Boy couldn't stand Sid." So, can you explain the psychology of, on the one hand, because we all kind of had it with Sid, hating him at times, being frustrated with him at times, and yet then still having these human moments with him?
Well, Such had a better reason to be bitter because Sidney basically got his column as a Tribune sports columnist pulled,
right?
Because of the whole Metrodome mess. But I guess Such must have just said, they had some, when Such was this neophyte, and he'd travel around with Sid, and Sid would keep the door open to the other hotel room so in case he had a crisis or something, and Such would tell stories about having to go off and go across the hall and turn the shower off for him because he didn't know how to turn the shower off and stuff like that. And I think Such has a powerful bride, and she might have said, just forget it and get along with it, but I don't know what it is. But listen, I was thinking about this today, Dan. If there's anybody who should be grateful for Sid, it's you.
How so?
Because you ended up in this market because of Sid. Because no matter what Bozich tells you, sitting next to Sid for a half of a Gopher game is the reason he called up. He called up his boss and said, "I want to come home." He drove Bozich out.
That's a great point.
Got you. Yes.
I hadn't thought of it that way. You're right. I mean, I got the call from Bozich myself. I was sitting in my apartment, in my condo in Dallas. It's a Saturday night. It's that night of that game. He went to his Sid, and he basically said, "I can't stay. I'm going to show up at Arnie Robbins' door, his house." And he did Sunday morning and said, "I can't do it." You're right. And if he hadn't, who knows? I'd probably still be molding in Dallas.
I was there, and he left at halftime. He was supposed to do like a 15-inch sidebar or something. He just after a half of hearing Sid cheering and screaming and complaining about the officials, he just left.
Do you have a theory on why he and Bud seem to hit it off beyond just the professional part of it? I mean, you wrote a lot about that. You know that. What's that all about?
Well, 1949, Bud's on campus. He gets Sid, lets him use his car. Sid lets him do all this other stuff. Bud's been known to take advantage of situations, but somehow it developed into I think Bud's wife, Pat, liked Sid a lot, and he'd always bring gifts and stuff like that. And but to have the world's greatest outdoorsman be a good buddy of a guy who couldn't tell a goose from a squirrel is a phenomenal.
Astonishing.
Because there couldn't have been two guys more different in the entire world, and I don't understand it. There was certainly part of it was, I think initially it was Bud probably taking advantage of Sid trying to, get information and whatever, be a buddy with that. There's a famous 1949 Gopher football team that Bud was on that was supposed to go to the Rose Bowl, and Sid was the beat guy, and and that's where the friendship started. But then, Sid signed him for the Lakers, or helped sign him for the Lakers, and I don't know. As mysterious as Sid is, there's a little mystery about Bud too. So I I don't think I can analyze it, but it's phenomenal to me that these two opposite human. I mean, one guy is the most common sense, think everything out guy in the history of the mankind, and the other never had more than 2 straight hours of sleep in his life without popping up in bed and having some weird thoughts in his head. I mean, complete opposite, but somehow it worked. I don't know how that works.
It's the astonishing part about it. Just a couple last things before we go. We're chatting with Patrick Royce on Sid. Do you buy the notion there are homers in other towns, okay? But do you buy the notion that he set a template that was so overpowering that it did indeed make it harder for guys like you and me who kind of want to push back and want to needle and want to occasionally even rip rather vociferously, that it really made it harder than it otherwise would have been in other places? Do you think that it was that different, this market, because of him?
I do think, in my immaturity of younger age, it made me more determined to push back.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I got to admit, I didn't write 3 straight columns when Indiana came to town praising the great program without mentioning Bobby Knight's name because of Bobby Knight. Because I wanted to agitate Sid. So, I think that in my younger years,
right,
that I did, that I pushed back harder. I think it certainly created a situation in town where you had especially with Gopher fans, you had this huge population that didn't want to hear the truth. And that was probably, it might have been a little more difficult where, it's to take a shot, and here's the other thing. Nothing was Sidney never wrote a subtle sentence in his life, right? So any attempts at subtle, sarcasm, stuff like that, fell flat with the Sid audience. So there's something to that, but I think in the end it led to more negative reporting than more positive reporting.
Probably right.
You didn't want to be like Sid.
Right.
You didn't want to be put in that category.
Last item, who first called him? Was it you or somebody? How did he get the moniker The Great Man?
I think I started calling him that in print, but I don't know if it came from.
Okay.
I think I did probably call him that in print because, at least in the opinion of a lot of people, including him, he was the great man. What I always loved best about it, I would have liked to seen Sid's eulogy to himself. That's what I would have liked to seen, because every other eulogy he wrote ended up being a tribute to himself.
That was our joke, yes.
Somehow he would twist them around to what he did for that person, and it would be nice to see. That would never work, but it would be a nice satirical column to write. Sid paying tribute to Sid would be pretty good, but I don't think we have an appetite for that.
No, you're probably right about that. Well, you're right. A lot of times it would even be the salute to himself for being the one guy who could get him on the phone. The guy who died on the phone. So as opposed to any sort of, what do you remember about the guy himself? It became kind of an open joke for us. The work was exemplary, man, today. You guys did a really, really, did yourself. And I know the obit, you said a lot of it had been already written, but I know you added some stuff to it and you wrote some other stuff. And even the video stuff that you guys have is smart, man, because it's almost time capsule, kinds of things. So, you guys did a really good job. You started for sure.
Thank you a lot. We had one big screw up though. The tape recorder that they drew a picture of was the second version. We did the old one that you could have beat off buggers with.
Oh no,
remember that one? Yeah. It was a more modern tape recorder. They should have had the picture to draw.
They should have. Yeah, I guess I didn't even. Charles Hallman had tweeted me and mentioned something about that, and I didn't understand it, but I guess that's what it was. I didn't look at the drawing closely enough.
Because, the old one, guy Eddie and Herbeck and those guys used to get on it and leave these profane messages and stuff.
Yeah.
When he'd leave it around and he'd be playing it and it'd say, hey, Sid, bleep, 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 and all this stuff. So
End of an era. Unbelievable.
You know, we can say about everybody, we'll never see his like again, but in this case, 100% accurate.
Thank you. I appreciate it as always, man. Be good.
All right.
Thanks, Patrick. That's Patrick Royce.